Alright, YouTube, I thought I'd cover the Mayan Doomsday prophecy that everyone continues to talk about years after it was first made available to the public, essentially, through the internet predominantly and also through television. And I'd like to share a few notions with you that come from my own thoughts and from my own understanding of this actual prophecy, if you can indeed call it a prophecy, and also a little bit about the internet and how it has seemingly affected this. The main basic point of December 21st, 2012 is not the literal cataclysmic end of the world because of a pole shift or because of some electromagnetic event or because of a zombie outbreak or any of the other things that people have been talking about, because you've got to understand something. The mind of the Mayan, and if you study anthropology you can see this is true with other cultures as well, didn't look at time the same way as Westerners currently look at time. We look at it predominantly as a line. It's continuous but broken down into units, of course. And time essentially passes without any real rhythm or rhyme, and things sort of react with one another and just do as they please. The Mayans didn't look at time in this manner. The way in which they devised their calendar system was predominantly based on generations of human beings and certain cosmic or natural cycles. That is, the 20-year period. They understood the weather. Obviously, these people had a wide understanding of the cosmos. It's not too much of a stretch of the imagination to imagine that they also had a wide understanding of natural rhythms, because obviously they were obsessed with the topic of time. I'm sure that they denoted other systems that operate here on Earth as well. The truth of their calendar system is that it takes into effect and takes into consideration natural cycles such as the generations of human beings, generations of ideas, generations of ritualistic behavior, and so forth, and it incorporates them into a timeline which repeats over and over. The reason that it repeats is that time does indeed repeat itself. We can see it throughout history. Things do operate on a rhythmic scale. Because if you come to the understanding that mankind is predominantly run by his brain, and by his reaction to the natural environment and to other human beings, the brain is essentially a very, very complex organic computer. Computers operate on the same basis, code, zeros and ones, hexadecimal, however you want to term it. They operate on the same basis that a computer would. That the brain would. So they go through natural cycles. Governments go through cycles. You can read Republic by Plato. Plato understood that there was a natural cycle that governments went through unless they were held together strenuously by a constitution and a populace that knew what it was talking about, that it would cycle through the same cycle over and over, where first it would be a timocracy and the strongest and most noble would rule. Then it would slowly devolve into a democracy. The democracy would turn into an oligarchy because in a democratic arrangement, the strong and the most manipulative and cunning will naturally take control and conglomerate power, and then slowly it would turn into a tyranny. As that process progressed, then it would collapse. Someone would overthrow the government and do the entire thing again. And, of course, suggested that the way to break that cycle was through a republic, which operates in the same cycle and in the same sense, but it operates on a more constrained level as long as it's built properly. So you can look at mankind and you can see throughout history people understood that human government, religion, everything operates on cycles. Things arise, flourish, and die. The prophecy of the Mayans for December 21st, 2012 revolves around the concept of there being food for half of the people, and for others they won't have food. The idea, and this is the literal prophecy, for half there will be plenty and for half there will be nothing. It's a time of the end of the Word of God, and it's a time to organize a resistance, sort of, a revolutionary spirit, a time to stand for change. What we see in this is just a prediction about the natural cycle of man, and indeed, the Mayan calendar has correctly prophesied events in advance. This doesn't come from any divine power. It doesn't come from, Kukulkan or Chak or any of the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl or any of these other figures. The fact that they're able to make these predictions, and Nostradamus probably had the same knack, is that number one, the prophecies remain slightly vague, which helps them apply to more situations anyway. That's an age-old technique for fortune tellers and so forth, is to remain vague. The Mayans not so much, ironically, but they're still correct in many cases. What the Mayans did was simply look at natural cycles. They've got the 20-year count, they've got the months, they've got the long count, and these merely take into consideration the cycles that the Earth and the stars and Venus and the Sun and natural rhythms go through. So here's my prediction for December 21st, 2012, which you can argue that because of the difference in dates and so forth, you can argue may have already come and gone. Some people are talking about the galactic alignment actually happened in the 90s. I would tend to disagree with this. It's quite well documented that that's not the case, and it is indeed on December 21st. Do I give that any significance other than it's an astronomical event that they understood would happen on that date? No, I don't think there's going to be any black hole swallowing the Earth or something. What's going to happen is naturally we're going to go through a cycle where there will be famine in the world. Now this can apply to any situation, but perhaps there will be more famine than before. Maybe the hurricanes will continue getting stronger. There'll be a giant worldwide earthquake or something. However, the prophecy of that Baktun never states that the human race will be wiped out. It talks about the earth being obliterated by water and leaving nothing but blackness behind. Now, this could be interpreted one of two ways: as a literal worldwide flood, a giant earth-consuming tsunami, perhaps, rain for 40 days and 40 nights, something extravagant like that. Or you can take it more as a metaphor, the idea of perhaps wisdom being rained down and things actually being better. Things are resituated and renewed and refreshed. As to the other part of the prophecy, the idea of the end of the Word of God, look around you. You already see that happening. The fastest growing religious movement on earth is non-religious. The fastest growing by percent and by absolute numbers are what they call the nons, people who have no specific religion. They may be atheist, agnostic, they may not care. Some of them are, social members of maybe a religion, but they don't truly believe in that God. We already see, especially in the Western world, that's indeed happening. It's spreading to the East as well. As the Eastern cultures become more advanced and civilized, their people get used to a better life. They no longer have the need to believe in a God, because they no longer have the need to pray to this deity for the basic necessities, which now they can take for granted. It's an end to the Word of God, because there's no longer any reason for a God to exist for them. That's what we see in the Western world. Now, some people have stated that there's no correlation between atheism and quality of life. I disagree. What I do also disagree with in subject is that I don't believe that an increase in atheism or agnosticism precludes an increase in the quality of life. Quite the opposite. When people have a higher quality of life, they're better educated, there's more money, they're not feeling economic stressors or social stressors as much, they naturally are going to be less inclined to care about these gods and figures because they no longer have need of them. They become, in essence, satanic. They become self-motivated. Others would say, well, they become greedy. That can be argued one way or the other. But indeed, these cultures, when they become powerful, like the Scandinavians, like the United States or Britain, like certain Eastern countries, the religious rate steeply drops off. Within the next 20 years, which is the period that the Mayans consider this Baktun, starting on December 21st, 2012, if current projections remain stable, although there's actually evidence that they may pick up, atheism is going to slowly take over most of Western Europe. It's going to start rivaling some of the larger religious groups in the USA. It'll take over Canada, Australia, Even South and Central America will slowly go the way of the non-believer. Even the Middle Eastern countries, once 100% Islamic, in certain countries around those regions, non-belief or social Islam, the idea that you go to the mosque but you don't really believe in Allah, or you believe in Allah but you don't really go to the mosque, those ideals are picking up. So while there's still a great threat from religion to destroy freedom, what you see now is the next in a 20-year cycle. The last 20-year cycle heralded the beginning of the end for fundamentalist Christianity in the United States. You saw in the early 80s, the televangelists and the Reaganites and all of these people took over. That was not evidence that they were winning. That was evidence that they were losing. The evidence goes like this. They felt the stressors. The Christian populace, the fundamentalists, hadn't been voting at large rates because they felt no need to. They didn't feel threatened. Once they realized they were dying out, they consolidated and took over power. This caused a reaction, of course later with Bill Clinton, in which the evangelicals lost because once they took power, they mismanaged things so thoroughly that the average citizen no longer wanted a Reagan or a Bush Sr. or a Jimmy Carter in office, and they voted them out, and that's what you see today. Of course, Bush being the outlier only because Bush stole the election, which you can again argue either way. The idea of mass resistance, which is also included in this prophecy, seems to root partially from the internet, which is something that people are wont to talk about. They don't actually want to talk about the idea that the internet actually has a serious purpose in this world. It is as a direct result of the internet that a large number of the major politicians that you see today are in office. It's the result of the internet that atheism is slowly creeping up ever faster and faster. The internet is the reason for these things. And that is because those who understand technology and who thus tend to have a higher education rate and thus tend to be more non-believers can control the internet for their own purposes. The religious have significantly lagged behind the rest of the culture as far as dominating the internet. They dominate AM radio, they dominate television, they dominate the FM dials, they certainly don't dominate the internet. That's why you have bills like SOPA and so forth going through. They want to control the internet. The government wants a slice of the pie, the religious leaders want a slice of the pie, the big businesses want a slice of the pie. That's the reason why that they try to push these laws through. They want to tame the internet so they can make it more family-friendly, bland, politically correct, and cloying, removing the people from the internet that have actually built it and made it interesting in the first place. So here we see the truth of the Mayan prophecy. It's merely a natural rhythmic cycle of nature. It doesn't mean the world is going to burst into flames, or an asteroid is going to come smashing down, or that zombies are going to take over the world. What this prophecy merely means, and what the end of the calendar merely means, is just another step in the progression of their cycle. It means nothing more than that. So while the prediction may very well come true, because non-belief could very well overtake belief in the world within the next 20 years until 2032, and while there is a likelihood of great famine as a result of the problems that man's creating in this world, destroying the environment, constant warfare, and especially in the Middle East, the end of oil perhaps, there will be famine for a lot of people in this world. What I don't think is that the world's going to literally end. That would be a stretch of the imagination beyond your wildest dreams to believe that, yes, the world is going to be completely flooded by water until there's nothing left. Because the Mayans believed that the world had come through those cycles 4 times before, and you see, of course, if you study archaeological evidence and so forth, no, the world hasn't ended every so-and-so how many years. Ironically, the beginning of this age that we're in, that ends on December 21st, 2012, roughly corresponds to the beginning of the first advanced civilizations on Earth, sort of the Minoans and the Greeks and so forth, and the Egyptians, which I find interesting. Perhaps they extrapolated, perhaps they had some secret knowledge about when culture had started to be developed, and they extrapolated from there. Perhaps this galactic alignment does have some effect on the human biorhythm, and literally does progress us from proto-humans into primitive man, from primitive man into civilized man, which we are now, and perhaps from what we would term civilized man into something totally new. And once religion dies, as it is slowly dying, let's face it, non-belief is taking over. As religion slowly dies, and as governments are tempered by movements of the people, and as you have more constitutions, and as you have more fair law systems, and as you have new wise people and thinkers thinking up new ways to regulate the world and make it a better place to live in, what you will see is an improved human race, which will be more educated. You'll see a human race which is more fruitful and more able to tolerate diversity. So December the 21st, 2012 doesn't mean the end of the physical world. It's merely another step in their long count that just goes into another long count. It's just another age, which they believe, it seems, to be premeditated primarily by the increase of wisdom and knowledge, which I fail to see how this could possibly be a bad thing in a world right now run predominantly by theocrats and by, fascist idiots who have no conception of human suffering and thus do nothing to improve the lot of their people's lives, and primarily grind down their subjects like Vlad the Impaler or, Joseph Stalin or something like that. So yes, there will be changes coming, as there have always been changes in the past. Perhaps they'll be more dramatic during this cycle. We don't know. We can't see the future. But if past action is any indicator of the future, yes, I would say there is some validity to the claim. There's just no validity to the stories that this is literally the end of the world. It doesn't make any logical sense and isn't even really predicted in the Mayan, codex.